Arjun had always been the type to arrive early. That Monday morning was no different. He walked into the office building at 7:30. A good hour before most people would show up. The elevator ride to the 12th floor was quiet, just the way he liked it. He needed time to prepare for his presentation, to go through his slides one more time, to make sure everything was perfect. The small conference room at the end of the hallway seemed like the ideal spot. It had a large screen, a decent table, and most importantly, it was always empty at this hour. Arjun pushed open the door, set his laptop bag on the table, and started arranging his notes. He had barely opened his laptop when the door swung open again. A woman walked in, phone pressed to her ear, clearly in the middle of an important conversation. She looked startled to see him there, but she held up one finger in a quick apology and continued talking. Arjun recognized her. Zara, from marketing. They worked on different floors, different departments. He had seen her around, maybe nodded hello a few times in the hallway or the cafeteria, but that was about it. Zara finished her call and looked at him with an apologetic smile. She explained she needed a quiet place for client calls this morning, asked if she was disturbing him. Arjun shook his head, said he was just preparing for a presentation, told her it was fine. The room was big enough for both of them. She thanked him and settled into a chair on the opposite side of the room, pulling out her own laptop. The silence between them felt a bit awkward, but not unbearable. They were both busy with their own work. Arjun tried to focus on his slides, but he found himself glancing up occasionally. Zara seemed completely absorbed in whatever she was typing, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. Then it happened. A loud beeping sound filled the room, followed by a mechanical clicking noise. Both of them looked up at the same time, confused. Red lights started flashing near the door. Arjun stood up and walked over, tried the door handle. It would not move. He tried again, pushing harder this time. Nothing. The door was completely locked. Zara joined him, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. She tried the handle too, pulling and pushing with no success. They looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. What just happened? Arjun pulled out his phone and called the building security desk. The security guard answered after a few rings, and Arjun quickly explained their situation. The guard sighed heavily on the other end. Apparently, the entire building's fire safety system had malfunctioned. Some kind of software error triggered automatic lockdowns in several conference rooms across multiple floors. The electronic locks were frozen, sealed from the outside. The guard assured them that help was coming, but the technician who could manually override the system was at another building dealing with the same problem. It would take at least several hours. Maybe more. Several hours. Arjun felt his stomach drop. He had that presentation at 11. Zara looked equally distressed, mentioning she had 3 important client calls scheduled throughout the morning, but there was nothing either of them could do. They were stuck, truly stuck, in this small conference room with no way out. The first few minutes after that phone call were tense. Arjun paced near the windows while Zara made calls to reschedule her meetings. He sent messages to his manager, explaining the bizarre situation, asking someone else to cover his presentation. The frustration was evident on both their faces. This was not how either of them had planned to spend their Monday. After the initial flurry of calls and messages, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. They were essentially strangers, thrown together by a technical malfunction, trapped in a space neither could leave. Arjun went back to his side of the table. Zara stayed on hers. They avoided eye contact, both unsure of what to say or do next. Time crawled by. Arjun checked his watch repeatedly. 20 minutes felt like an hour. He could hear Zara shifting in her chair, tapping her pen against her notepad. The awkwardness was thick enough to cut with a knife. He wondered what she was thinking, if she was as uncomfortable as he was. They were going to be here for hours. They could not just sit in silence, pretending the other person did not exist. That would drive anyone crazy. Finally, Arjun cleared his throat. He asked Zara if she wanted some water, mentioned he had an extra bottle in his bag. She looked up, seemed grateful for the break in silence, and said yes. He handed her the bottle, and she thanked him. It was a small gesture, but it broke some of the tension. She offered him some biscuits from her bag in return. He accepted, and they shared a brief, somewhat forced smile. The ice was starting to crack. Just a little. The first hour passed slowly, but things gradually became less awkward between them. Arjun and Zara had moved past the initial shock of being trapped and started making small talk. It began with complaints about the building. Zara mentioned how the elevators were always breaking down, how maintenance seemed to ignore every complaint. Arjun agreed, sharing his own frustrations about the air conditioning that never worked properly on his floor. From building complaints, they moved to work topics. Zara talked about her marketing campaigns, the pressure to come up with creative ideas that would impress difficult clients. Arjun listened, found himself genuinely interested. He told her about his work in finance, the stress of managing accounts and preparing reports that could make or break budget decisions. They discovered they both dealt with unrealistic deadlines and demanding bosses. There was something comforting in realizing they shared similar workplace struggles. Zara had a good sense of humor. She told a story about a client who insisted on using a bright pink color scheme for a professional banking app, despite all advice against it. The way she imitated the client's stubborn insistence made Arjun laugh. Really laugh. For the first time that morning. He reciprocated with his own story about a colleague who accidentally sent a very personal email to the entire finance department instead of his girlfriend. The embarrassment that followed had become office legend. As they talked, Arjun noticed things about Zara he had never paid attention to before. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about projects she was passionate about, how she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. She had this warm laugh that made the locked room feel less confining. Around the second hour, Zara's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and her expression changed. She answered with a polite greeting, but Arjun could hear the tension in her voice. It was her mother. He tried not to listen, focused on his own phone, but the room was small and sound carried easily. The conversation was in a mix of English and Hindi. Something about a family gathering. About meeting someone her parents wanted her to meet. Zara's responses were patient but firm. She was trying to explain something, but clearly not succeeding. When she ended the call, she sat quietly for a moment, staring at her phone. Arjun noticed she looked troubled. He hesitated, not wanting to pry. But something made him ask if everything was okay. Zara looked up, seemed surprised by his concern. For a moment, he thought she might brush it off, give some polite answer. Instead, she sighed and said her family had been pressuring her about marriage lately. She explained that her parents meant well, but they did not understand why she wanted to focus on her career right now. Every phone call lately seemed to include hints about suitable matches, questions about when she would settle down. She loved her family, but the constant pressure was exhausting. She felt torn between respecting their wishes and living her own life on her own terms. Arjun listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly and told her he understood more than she might think. His own family had expectations too. He was the oldest, responsible for helping his younger sister through college. Every decision he made was weighed against family obligations. His parents wanted him to marry soon as well, to someone they approved of, in a way they considered proper. He had ended a relationship 2 years ago partly because of these pressures, and he still was not sure if he had made the right choice. Zara looked at him with new understanding. She had not expected this level of honesty from someone who was essentially a stranger an hour ago, but somehow, being trapped together created this strange bubble where normal social barriers did not apply. They were just two people, stuck in a room, sharing truths they rarely spoke about. The conversation continued, deeper now. They talked about the struggle of balancing modern ambitions with traditional values, about feeling guilty for wanting things their parents did not quite understand, about the loneliness that came with always trying to meet everyone else's expectations while losing sight of their own desires. Something had shifted between them. The awkward strangers from the morning were gone. In their place were two people who had discovered an unexpected connection, a recognition that they were fighting similar battles in their own lives. The locked room no longer felt like a trap. It felt like a safe space where they could be honest without judgment. Arjun caught himself looking at Zara differently now, seeing beyond the polished professional exterior to the real person underneath. 3 hours had passed since the lockdown began. Arjun and Zara had long since abandoned their separate corners of the room. They now sat across from each other at the conference table, their initial reserve completely dissolved. The conversation had taken on an easy, comfortable rhythm, jumping from topic to topic without any awkwardness. Zara mentioned something about old songs her grandmother used to play, and Arjun's face lit up. He loved old Bollywood music too. The classics from the 70s and 80s. They spent the next 20 minutes comparing favorite songs, singing snippets of lyrics, laughing when they both got the words wrong. It was such a simple thing, but it created this warm feeling between them, like discovering a secret shared language. From music, they moved to travel dreams. Zara pulled up photos on her phone of places she wanted to visit. The northern lights in Iceland, the ancient temples in Japan, the coffee plantations in Colombia. She had folders full of saved images, places she researched late at night when work stress kept her awake. Arjun admitted he did the same thing. He showed her his own collection of photos. The Swiss Alps, the beaches of Greece, the historic streets of Prague. They both laughed at how similar their dream destinations were. There was something bittersweet about sharing these dreams. Both of them worked so hard, saved money, talked about traveling someday. But that someday never seemed to come. There was always another project, another deadline, another responsibility. Zara said sometimes she felt like she was living for a future that kept moving further away. Arjun understood exactly what she meant. The conversation turned to their work again, but differently this time. Zara mentioned she had always been curious about financial planning, but found it intimidating. Arjun smiled and offered to explain some basics. He grabbed a notepad and started sketching simple diagrams, breaking down concepts into easy terms. Zara leaned forward, genuinely engaged, asking thoughtful questions. She was sharp, grasped ideas quickly, made connections he had not expected. Teaching her felt natural, enjoyable even. As afternoon faded into evening, they realized the lights were on an automatic timer. The room had large windows, but as the sun began to set, shadows started creeping across the walls. They talked about what would happen when the lights went out completely. Zara joked they would have to tell ghost stories like they were at a camping trip. Arjun laughed but felt a flutter of nervousness at the thought of being in darkness with her. The overhead lights flickered once, a warning. They both looked up. Zara said something about how strange it was that a day which started so frustratingly had turned into something completely unexpected. Arjun agreed, admitted that if someone had told him this morning he would spend the whole day talking to her, he would not have believed it. He had always noticed her around the office, thought she seemed confident, put together, maybe a bit unapproachable. She seemed surprised by this, said she had noticed him too. There was a pause after she said that. Arjun looked at her, really looked at her, and asked what she meant. Zara hesitated, then smiled a bit shyly. She confessed she had noticed him months ago, the way he carried himself in meetings, always calm and prepared. How he held the elevator for people even when he was clearly in a hurry. Small things that made her think he was different from most people in the office. She had wanted to talk to him properly but never found the right moment. Arjun felt his heart beat a little faster. He told her honestly that he had always thought she was too polished, too perfect. Someone who probably would not have time for regular conversations. But today had shown him how wrong first impressions could be. The real Zara was warm, funny, thoughtful, genuine, in ways that went beyond her professional image. The lights flickered again, dimmer this time. They were sitting closer now, Arjun realized. Though he could not remember when that had happened. They had both moved their chairs, narrowed the distance between them gradually over the past few hours. Zara reached for a pen at the same moment Arjun did. Their hands touched, just briefly, but neither pulled away immediately. The touch lingered for a second longer than necessary. When they finally moved apart, there was electricity in the air. Something unspoken but undeniable. The room felt smaller suddenly, more intimate. Arjun could feel his pulse in his throat. Zara was looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. Something between curiosity and anticipation. The connection between them had been building all day. conversation by conversation, shared story by shared story. Now it was impossible to ignore, impossible to pretend it was just friendly small talk between trapped colleagues. The lights flickered one final time and went out completely, leaving them in darkness except for the fading evening light from the windows. When the lights went out completely, the room transformed. The darkness was not total. There was still some dim light from the windows and the city lights outside. But it changed everything. Without bright overhead lighting, the atmosphere became more intimate, more private. Arjun and Zara sat in near darkness, and somehow it made talking easier, as if the shadows gave them permission to be even more honest. They moved from the table to sit on the floor, backs against the wall. It felt less formal, more comfortable for a conversation that had moved beyond workplace topics. Their shoulders touched slightly, and neither moved away. Arjun used his phone flashlight sparingly, just enough to see Zara's face when she spoke. In the darkness, Arjun found himself sharing things he rarely talked about. He told Zara about Priya, the woman he had dated 2 years ago. They had been together for nearly a year, and he had thought it might lead somewhere serious. But when his family responsibilities increased, when his sister needed financial help for college, Priya had not understood. She felt he prioritized his family over their relationship. The arguments became frequent, the distance grew, and eventually, they ended things. He had convinced himself it was for the best, but the truth was, it still hurt sometimes. Not because he missed Priya specifically, but because he wondered if he was capable of balancing love with duty. Zara listened quietly, then shared her own story. She had dated someone in college, a relationship that ended when they graduated and moved to different cities. After that, she had thrown herself into building her career. Somewhere along the way, she had built walls around herself. She had become so focused on being professional, on proving herself, that she forgot how to let people in. Her colleagues knew the efficient, capable Zara. Her family knew the dutiful daughter. But the real her, the one with doubts and dreams and fears, that person stayed hidden. She admitted she was scared she had lost the ability to be vulnerable with anyone. Arjun turned to look at her, even though he could barely see her face in the dim light. He told her she was being vulnerable right now, and it was not lost or broken, just protected. There was nothing wrong with that. Zara's voice was soft when she thanked him. Said she had not expected to have this kind of conversation today, or with him, or with anyone really. The silence that followed was comfortable but charged with tension. They were acutely aware of each other's presence, of how close they were sitting, of how much they had shared. Arjun could hear Zara breathing, could smell the faint scent of her perfume. His heart was racing, and he tried to stay calm, to not do anything that would break this moment. Then Zara shifted slightly, turned toward him. He could feel her looking at him even in the darkness. She said his name quietly, and something in her tone made him turn to face her fully. Their faces were close now, close enough that he could see the outline of her features in the shadows. Arjun reached out slowly, his hand trembling slightly, and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. His fingers lingered near her cheek. He asked quietly if this was okay, if he was reading things wrong. Zara did not answer with words. Instead, she leaned closer, closing the small distance between them. When their lips met, it was gentle at first, tentative, as if both were afraid of breaking something fragile. But then, the kiss deepened, and all the tension that had been building over the past hours released at once. Arjun's hand moved to her face, and Zara's fingers gripped his shirt. The kiss was intense, filled with all the emotions they had been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. They sat in silence for a moment, foreheads almost touching, trying to process what had just happened. The reality of the situation crashed over them like cold water. They had kissed. Colleagues who barely knew each other this morning had just kissed in a locked conference room. Arjun spoke first, his voice rough. He said he did not want this to be just because they were trapped here. He did not want her to think he took advantage of the situation, or that this was just some weird reaction to being locked up together. This mattered to him. She mattered to him, but he would understand if she regretted it, if she wanted to pretend it never happened. Zara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, Her voice was serious. She said she did not regret it, but she was scared. Scared that what they felt was only because of the unusual circumstances. Scared that tomorrow, when they were back in the normal world, this would not make sense anymore. Scared that they would ruin something before it even had a chance to begin. Arjun understood because he felt the same fear. But he also knew that what he learned about her today was real. The connection they had found was real. He just did not know if real was enough outside these four walls. They sat together in the darkness, holding hands now, both lost in their own thoughts about what came next. Just after midnight, they heard voices outside the conference room. Both Arjun and Zara scrambled to their feet, straightening their clothes, trying to look presentable. The electronic lock made a loud clicking sound, and then the door swung open. Light flooded in from the hallway, momentarily blinding them. Security personnel stood there looking apologetic, followed by the building manager who launched into a long explanation about the system failure and technical issues. Nearly 12 hours had passed since they had been locked in. 12 hours that felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Arjun and Zara gathered their belongings quietly. The manager kept apologizing, asking if they needed anything, if they were okay. They both assured him they were fine, just tired, ready to go home. As they walked out of the conference room together, the spell of the day seemed to break. The bright hallway lights felt harsh after hours in dim lighting. The open space felt overwhelming after the small, intimate room. In the elevator going down, they stood on opposite sides, suddenly awkward again. Other people might see them. Security cameras were recording. They were back in the real world, where colleagues did not kiss in conference rooms. The easy comfort of the locked room was gone, replaced by uncertainty and second thoughts. Outside the building, the night air was cool. Arjun pulled out his phone to call a cab. Zara stood a few feet away, wrapping her arms around herself, looking at the empty street. The silence between them felt different now, heavy with unspoken questions. Before Arjun could open the cab app, Zara spoke. She asked if they could talk somewhere. Maybe get coffee if any place was still open. Her voice was hesitant, like she was afraid he might say no. Arjun looked at her, saw the vulnerability in her expression, and felt relief wash over him. He wanted to talk too. They found a small 24-hour cafe a few blocks away. The place was nearly empty, just a tired-looking barista and one other customer in the corner. They ordered coffee and sat in a booth, facing each other across the table. The setting was so different from the conference room, so ordinary. And that ordinariness made everything feel more real and more complicated. Zara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and spoke first. She admitted she was terrified that everything they felt today was just the situation creating false intimacy. People bonded in unusual circumstances all the time, survivors of accidents, people stuck in storms. It was a documented psychological phenomenon. What if that was all this was? What if tomorrow, when they saw each other in the office, they realized it was all just a strange reaction to being trapped? Arjun listened, then took a deep breath. He said he understood her fear because he had the same thoughts. But he also knew that what he learned about her today went beyond just circumstance. He learned that she was funny and thoughtful and brave enough to be vulnerable. He learned that she cared deeply about her family even while struggling with their expectations. He learned that she had dreams she was afraid to chase and fears she rarely voiced. Those things were real, regardless of where he learned them. He continued, saying that maybe the room forced them to talk in ways they never would have otherwise. Maybe they never would have had this conversation in a normal setting. But that did not make the conversation less real or the connection less valid. He wanted to try. If she did. No pressure. No expectations. Just see if what started in that room could grow outside of it. Zara looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then slowly, a small smile appeared. She said she wanted to try too. But they had to be honest with each other. If it started feeling forced, if the magic did not translate to real life, they had to promise to be honest about that. They had to promise not to hold on to something just because of one intense day. Arjun agreed. They sat there for another hour, talking about practical things now, how they would handle seeing each other at work. Whether they should keep this quiet initially or be open about it, what their first actual date might look like, one that happened by choice rather than by malfunction. The conversation was different from the one in the locked room, more careful, more aware of consequences, but still comfortable in its own way. When they finally left the cafe, the sun was starting to rise. They walked slowly through the quiet streets, side by side, not quite touching but close enough to feel each other's presence. Zara said this had been the strangest day of her life. Arjun laughed and agreed. They reached a corner where they would part ways. Zara going left to her apartment, Arjun right to his. They stood there for a moment, neither wanting to be the first to leave. Then Zara stepped forward and hugged him. Brief but warm. She whispered thank you. Though for what exactly? Neither was quite sure. Thank you for the conversation, the honesty, the willingness to try. Thank you for making a terrible situation into something unexpected. Arjun hugged her back, said he would message her later, after they both got some sleep. She nodded and stepped back. They exchanged one more look, both smiling despite their exhaustion, and then went their separate ways. As Arjun walked toward his apartment, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe it would work out. Maybe it would not. Maybe the connection would fade with time and distance. But maybe, just maybe, being trapped in that room was the beginning of something real. The walls had forced them together. But what happened next was their choice. And for the first time in years, he was choosing to take a chance on something uncertain but full of possibility.